As you can see, we're directly in lesson 1.6 today, and that's because the subject of today's lesson is exclusively preparing for the test that you'll take in the course of your next class. The test is found at the end of lesson 1.6, so we'll go directly to the stop sign at the top of the lesson. Click on it, takes us right to the test. You see we have 1 minute and 45 seconds in which to take this test. The test is composed of 12 different gestures that you must perform to represent the ideas that you will hear as you click on each of these rectangles. And then this section is followed by 10 statements or questions that you need to form, and that's it. You have 1 minute and 45 seconds for that. The test, of course, as always, exists in 4 different forms. So I'll open the stopwatch. And I'll right mouse click and put the stopwatch up out of the way. Today you'll be doing the timing and the clicking on the rectangles. However, in the course of your test, it will be your instructor who will do that for you. So let's go through the first form of the test. I'll talk you through it. I'm not going to time it so that we can stop and talk at greater length about certain items. Okay, we go to the first one. I click on it. Tomorrow it'll be, or whoever it happens to be, your instructor will click on it.
Je.
And you hear je, and therefore you perform this gesture. You don't need to repeat the word at all.
Écoutez.
You'll simply perform the gesture in this fashion.
Habiter. Il.
There's no young man over here to point to, and so just by pointing to the side, looking straight forward indicates to your instructor you understand that you're talking about someone.
Faire. Ne pas.
Now here we need to make the gesture in 2 different places to represent the idea that the negation is composed of 2 words, ne and pas. And notice how I separate them. That's just to remind us that the verb appears between these 2 words.
Dire.
Now here we see the first of 2 functions, really, the transforming of a statement into a question of the first type and the second type. The first type, as you know, is going to
Est-ce
be
que?
This gesture right here, est-ce que, that's right. And the second type, as I click on it, you're not going to hear anything because there is no additional sound added when I use inversion, and I will simply do this with my hands. You could also whistle if you like to, which I often tend to do, but since you're taking a test, you probably won't feel like whistling. And so just invert your hands in this fashion, and the teacher will understand that you're reversing the subject and the verb.
Dire.
Right there.
Laver.
There we go. And last of all,
Tu.
tu. Voilà. Now we move to the 10 statements which follow the first form of the test. And we see the first statement is not a statement at all. It's a question we must form. And it's the second type of question, that is to say, which uses inversion. So normally I would say, by the way, notice something. Notice that I'm using il as the subject of every one of these statements or questions. And that's simply to simplify matters for you so you're not overburdened with too many things to have to remember in one particular test early in your instruction. So that should simplify things, which means you will be chopping the verb form, won't you, at the end of the verb when il is used as the subject. So normally this would be il habite à Détroit. Il habite à Détroit. But because we're using the second form of question, we're going to invert il and habite, and we'll say habite-t-il. Habite-t-il à Détroit? Well, the next is simply the same statement, this time without the inversion. And so, il habite à Détroit. The next is a negation, the same statement. So, il ne habite pas à Détroit. Now, the ne habite, of course, forms a contraction. So the correct response is il n'habite pas à Détroit. By the way, you're hearing this z in there. If you say il n'habite pas à Détroit at this point, as far as I'm concerned, good enough. There's a reason for that z. And again, il n'habite pas à Détroit. Again, this is to cause the language to flow together more smoothly. At this point, when you don't see the written language, you don't understand why that little z is in there. Don't worry about it, whether you use it, whether you don't use it. If you can remember it, that's fine. If you don't, that's fine as well. It's not really a primary focus at this point. Il ne habite pas à Détroit. Next, number 4. Il fait le lit. Notice with faire, I chopped it, I shortened it. Il fait le lit. And then il ne fait pas le lit. Okay. Next, this is a question using est-ce que. So est-ce que il and est-ce que il form the contraction. Est-ce qu'il écoute de la musique? Now a question using inversion. Écoute-t-il de la musique? Il ne écoute pas de la musique. And now we come to those unfortunate, I guess you'd have to say, or challenging questions or statements. It could be a statement, in this case is a question, which use reflexive pronouns. Reflexive pronouns are those pronouns when you're doing the action to yourself. I'm doing it to myself, you're doing it to yourself, he or she are doing something to himself or to herself, and you formal are doing this something to yourself. In these cases, when an action is performed to oneself, it's necessary to use a pronoun which shows that one's doing the action oneself. When it's je will be followed by me. Tu will be followed by te. Il will be followed by ce. Elle also by ce. And vous will be followed by vous. And therefore, let's say, for example, I want to say that I wash myself, my face, whatever. I would say je me lave, not just je lave. Tu te laves, not just tu laves. Tu laves would be you wash something else, like a car or the dishes. But tu te laves is you wash yourself. Il or elle would be se lave. Vous would be vous lavez. However, at this point, and this is up to your instructor and his or her discretion, but at this point, if you don't use the pronoun, it doesn't bother me at all. We will focus on reflexive pronouns in Unit 2. And so I will say things correctly, but if you're not saying the me, the te, the se, or the vous, that doesn't particularly bother me. Okay, here we go. So number 9 would be est-ce qu'il, which forms the contraction, est-ce qu'il se lave les mains? Hear that little se in there. That's, as far as I'm concerned, at this point, it's optional. But if you can learn it, great. Est-ce qu'il se lave les mains? And the last of all, this is forming a using inversion, excuse me. You'd say se lave-t-il les mains? Se lave-t-il les mains? Voila. Okay, next time through here, I'm going to actually time this one as though this were a real test. And I have 1 minute and 45 seconds in which to perform this second form of the test. I will click on it, and I will try not to race. I'll try to go at a reasonable pace. And let's see if I can finish well in advance of the 1 minute and 45 mark. Here we go.
Je.
Notice I'm just forming the gesture.
Elle.
I'm not...
Ne pas.
I'm not saying the word as well.
Dire.
If it helps you to say it, that's fine. You may, but it's not necessary.
Habiter. Est-ce que
With the functions, of course, I already can see
tu
what I need to do. I don't have to actually click, but I'm going to anyway. You don't have to whistle.
il vous faire écouter
Okay, now I'll just make the statements. I want to explain them. Est-ce qu'il habite à Détroit? Notice I didn't say est-ce que il, it was a contraction. Habite-t-il à Détroit? Fait-il le lit? Notice I didn't want to say fait-il. Fait-il is awkward. I want to cause the words to flow smoothly, so I put the te in there. Fait-il le lit? Fait-il... No, il fait le lit, excuse me. Il ne fait pas le lit. Il écoute de la musique. Il ne écoute, now make a contraction, il n'écoute pas de la musique. Est-ce qu'il se lave les mains? Hear the contraction, est-ce qu'il? Il se lave les mains. And il ne se lave pas les mains. Stop. Well, I had 6 seconds, but remember, I did go through there and explain a few things to you as I went along. I could have done it much more rapidly. Okay, so you should be able to finish in time if you can maintain the kind of a pace that I was maintaining, but that will only be possible if today, in the course of today's class, you study, you practice each of the 4 sections of this test, and then you'll take the test itself in the course of the next lesson, I should say, the next time we're together. Okay, that's it for today. Bon courage. It's up to you now. Lesson 1.6. Au revoir.